Well, hello and welcome back to the Neighborhood Book Club. We're back once again on episode 8 with Holes by Louis Sachar, a classic and sure to be one of your favorites as it is one of mine. Let's read chapter 29, page 127. There was a change in weather, for the worst. The air became unbearably humid. Stanley was drenched in sweat. Beads of moisture ran down the handle of his shovel. It was almost as if the temperature had gotten so hot that the air itself was sweating. A loud boom of thunder echoed across the empty lake. A storm was way off to the west, beyond the mountains. Stanley could count more than 30 seconds between the flash of lightning and the clap of thunder. That's how far away the storm was. Sound travels a great distance across a barren wasteland. Usually, Stanley couldn't see the mountains at this time of day. The only time they were visible was just at sunup, before the air became hazy. Now, however, the sky was very dark off to the west, and every time the lightning flashed, the dark shape of the mountains would briefly appear. "Come on, rain!" shouted Armpit. "Blow this way!" "Maybe it'll rain so hard it will fill up the whole lake," said Squid. "We can go swimming." 40 days and 40 nights, said X-Ray. "Guess we better start building us an ark. Get 2 of each animal, right?" "Right," said Zigzag. 2 rattlesnakes, 2 scorpions, 2 yellow-spotted lizards. The humidity, or maybe the electricity in the air, had made Zigzag's head even more wild-looking. His frizzy blonde hair stuck almost straight out. The horizon lit up with a huge web of lightning. In that split second, Stanley thought he saw an unusual rock formation on the top of the mountain peaks. The peak looked to him exactly like a giant fist, with the thumb sticking straight up. Then it was gone, and Stanley wasn't sure whether he'd seen it or not. "I found refuge on God's thumb." That was what his great-grandfather had supposedly said after Kate Barlow had robbed him and left him stranded in the desert. No one ever knew what he meant by that. He was delirious when he said it. But how could he live for 3 weeks without food or water? Stanley had asked his father. "I don't know, I wasn't there," replied his father. "I wasn't born yet. My father wasn't born yet. My grandmother, your great-great-grandmother, was a nurse in the hospital where they treated him. He'd always talked about how he'd dab his forehead with a cool wet cloth. He said that's why he fell in love with her. He thought she was an angel. A real angel. His father didn't know. What about after he got better? Did he ever say what he meant by God's thumb or how he survived? No, he just blamed his no-good pig-stealing father. The storm moved off further west. along with any hope of rain. But the image of the fist and thumb remained in Stanley's head. Although instead of lightning flashes behind the thumb, in Stanley's mind the lightning was coming out of the thumb, as if it were the thumb of God. Chapter 30, page 130. The next day was Zigzag's birthday, or so he said. Zigzag lay in his cot as everyone headed outside. I get to sleep in because it's my birthday. Then, a little while later, he cut into his breakfast line, just in front of Squid. Squid told him he had to go to the end of the line. Hey, it's my birthday, Zigzag said, staying where he was. It's not your birthday, said Magnet, who was standing behind Squid. Is too, said Zigzag. July 8th. Stanley was behind Magnet. He didn't know what day of the week it was, let alone the date. It could have been July 8th, but how would Zigzag know? He tried to figure out how long he had been camping at Camp Green Lake, if indeed it was July 8th. I came here on May 24th, he said out loud. So that means I've been here 46 days, said Zero. Stanley was still trying to remember how many days there were in May and June. He looked at Zero. He learned not to doubt him when it came to math. 46 days, it felt like more like 1,000. He didn't dig a hole the first day, and he hadn't dug on one up yet today. That meant he dug 44 holes, if it really was July 8th. Can I have an extra juice carton? Zigzag asked Mr. Sir. It's my birthday. To everyone's surprise, Mr. Sir gave it to him. Stanley dug his shovel into the dirt. Hole number 45. The 45th hole is the hardest, he said to himself. But that really wasn't true, and he knew it. He was a lot stronger than he first arrived. His body had adjusted somewhat to the heat and the harsh conditions. Mr. Sir was no longer depriving him of water, after having to get by on less water for a week or so. Stanley now felt like he had all the water he could want. Of course, it helped that Zero dug some of his hole for each day. But that wasn't as great as everyone thought it was. He always felt awkward while Zero was digging his hole, unsure of what to do with himself. Usually he stood around a while before sitting off by himself on the hard ground, with the sun beating down on him. It was better than digging, but not a lot better. When the sun came up a couple hours later, Stanley looked for the thumb of God. The mountains were little more dark shadows on the horizon. He thought he could make out a spot where the top of one mountain seemed to jut upward, but it didn't seem very impressive. A short time later, the mountains were no longer visible, hidden behind the glare of sun reflecting off the dirty air. It was possible, he realized, that he was somewhere near where Kate Barlow had robbed his great-grandfather. If that was really her lipstick tube he'd found, then she must have lived somewhere around here. Zero took his turn before the lunch break. Stanley climbed out of his hole, and Zero climbed down into it. Hey, caveman, said Zigzag. You should get a whip. Then, if your slave doesn't dig fast enough, you can crack it across his back. He's not my slave, said Stanley. We have a deal, that's all. A good deal for you, said Zigzag. It was Zero's idea, not mine. Don't you know, Zig, said X-Ray, coming over. Caveman's doing Zero a big favor. Zero likes to dig holes. He sure is a nice guy to let Zero dig his hole for him, said Squid. Well, what about me? Asked Armpit. I like to dig holes too. Can I dig for you, Caveman, after Zero's finished? The other boys laughed. No, I want to, said Zigzag. It's my birthday. Stanley tried his best to ignore him. Zigzag kept at it. Come on, Caveman, be a pal. Let me dig your hole. Stanley smiled as if it were all a big joke. When Mr. Pendanski arrived with water and lunch, Zigzag offered Stanley his place in line. Since you're so much better than me. Stanley remained where he was. I didn't say I was better. You're insulting him, Zig, said X-Ray. Why should Caveman take your place when he deserves to be at the very front? He's better than all of us. Aren't you, Caveman? No, said Stanley. Sure you are, said X-Ray. Now come to the front of the line where you belong. That's okay, said Stanley. No, it's not okay, said X-Ray. Get up here. Stanley hesitated, then moved to the front of the line. Well, this is a first, Mr. Pendanski said, coming around the side of the truck. He filled Stanley's canteen and handed him a sack of lunch. He was glad that he had been digging his own hole for the rest of the day. Maybe the other boys would leave him alone. Maybe he shouldn't let Zero dig his hole for him anymore. But he needed to save his energy to be a good teacher. He bit into his sandwich, which contained some kind of meat and cheese mixture that came in a can. Just about everything at Green Lake came in a can. The supply truck came once a month. He glanced up to see Zigzag and Squid walking towards him. I'll give you my cookie if you let me dig your hole, said Zigzag. Squid laughed. Here, take my cookie, Zigzag holding it out for him. No thanks, said Stanley. Come on, take my cookie, said Zigzag, sticking it in his face. Leave me alone, said Stanley. Please eat my cookie, said Zigzag, holding it under Stanley's nose. Squid laughed. Stanley pushed it away. Zigzag pushed him back. Don't push me. I didn't. Stanley got to his feet. He looked around. Mr. Pendanski was filling Zero's canteen. Zigzag pushed him again. I said, don't push me. Stanley took a step backwards, carefully avoiding Zero's hole. Zigzag kept after him. He shoved Stanley and said, Quit pushing. Lay off, said Armpit, as he, Magnet, and X-Ray joined them. Why should he? Snapped X-Ray. Caveman's bigger. He can take care of himself. I don't want any trouble, Stanley said. Zigzag pushed him hard. Eat my cookie, he said. Stanley was glad to see Mr. Pendanski coming towards them along with Zero. "Hi, Mom," said Armpit. "We were just fooling around." "I saw what you guys were going on," Mr. Pendanski said. He turned to Stanley. "Go ahead, Stanley," he said. "Hit him back. You're bigger." Stanley stared at Mr. Pendanski in astonishment. "Teach the bully a lesson," said Mr. Pendanski. Zigzag hit Stanley on the shoulder with his open hand. "Teach me a lesson," he challenged. Stanley made a feeble attempt to punch Zigzag. Then he felt a flurry of fists against his head and neck. Zigzag had hold of his collar with one hand and was hitting him with the other. The collar ripped and Stanley fell backwards into the dirt. "That's enough," Mr. Pendanski yelled. It wasn't enough for Zigzag. He jumped on top of Stanley. "Stop!" shouted Mr. Pendanski. The side of Stanley's face was pressed flat against the dirt. He tried to protect himself, but Zigzag's fist slammed off his arms and pounded his face into the ground. All he could do was wait for it to be over. Then suddenly, Zigzag was off him. Stanley managed to look up, and he saw that Zero had his arm around Zigzag's long neck. Zigzag made a gagging sound as he desperately tried to pry Zero's arm off of him. "You're gonna kill him!" shouted Mr. Pendanski. Zero kept squeezing. Armpit charged into them, freeing Zigzag from Zero's chokehold. The three boys fell onto the ground in different directions. Mr. Pendanski fired his pistol into the air. The other counselors came running from the office, the tents, or out on the lake. They had their guns drawn, but halted them when they saw the trouble was over. The warden walked over from her cabin. "There was a riot," Mr. Pendanski told her. "Zero almost strangled Ricky." The warden looked at Zigzag, who was still stretching and massaging his neck. Then she turned her attention to Stanley, who was obviously in the worst condition. "What happened to you?" "Nothing. It was a riot." "Zigzag was beating up the caveman," said Armpit. "Then Zero started choking Zigzag. I had to pull Zero off Zigzag. It was all over before Mom fired his gun." "They just got a little hot, that's all," said X-Ray. "You know how it is in the sun all day. People get hot, right? But now everything's cool." "I see," said the warden. She turned to Zigzag. "What's the matter? Didn't you get a puppy for your birthday?" "Zig's just a little hot," said X-Ray. "Out in the sun all day, you know how it is. The blood starts to boil." "Is that what happened, Zigzag?" asked the warden. "Yeah," said Zigzag. "Like X-Ray said, working so hard in the hot sun while Caveman just sits around doing nothing, my blood boiled." "Excuse me?" said the warden. "Caveman digs his holes just like everyone else." Zigzag shrugged. "Sometimes." "Excuse me?" "Zero's been digging part of Caveman's hole every day," said Squid. The warden looked from Squid to Stanley to Zero. "I'm teaching him to read and write," said Stanley. "It's sort of a trade. The hole still gets dug, so what does it matter who digs it?" "Excuse me?" said the warden. "Isn't it more important for him to learn to read?" Stanley asked. Doesn't that build character more than digging holes? That's his character, said the warden. What about your character? Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. The warden turned to Zero. Well, Zero, what have you learned so far? Zero said nothing. Have you just been digging Caveman's hole for nothing? The warden asked him. He likes to dig holes, said Mr. Pendanski. Tell me what you learned yesterday, said the warden. Surely you can remember that. Zero said nothing. Mr. Pendanski laughed. He picked up the shovel and said, You might as well try to teach this shovel to read. It's got more brains than Zero. The at sound, said Zero. The at sound, repeated the warden. Well then, tell me, what does C-A-T spell? Zero glanced around uneasily. Stanley knew he knew the answer. Zero just didn't like answering questions. Cat, Zero said. Mr. Pendanski clapped his hands. Bravo, bravo, the boy is a genius. F-A-T, asked the warden. Zero thought a moment. Stanley hadn't taught him the F sound yet. F, Zero whispered. F, fat. How about H-A-T? asked the warden. Stanley hadn't taught him the H sound either. Zero concentrated hard, then said, Chat. All the counselors laughed. He's a genius, all right, said Mr. Pendanski. He's so stupid, he doesn't even know he's stupid. Stanley didn't know why Mr. Pendanski seemed to have it in for Zero. If Mr. Pendanski only thought about it, he'd realize it was very logical for Zero to think that the letter H made a sh sound. Okay, from now on, I don't want anyone digging anyone else's holes, said the warden. And no more reading lessons. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Good, said the warden. She turned to Stanley. You know why you're digging holes? Because it's good for you. It teaches you a lesson. If Zero digs your hole for you, then you're not learning your lesson, are you? I guess not, Stanley mumbled, although he knew they weren't digging just to learn a lesson. She was looking for something. Something that belonged to Kissin' Kate Barlow. Why can't I dig my own hole but still teach Zero to read? He asked. What's wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with that, the warden said. It leads to trouble. Zero almost killed Zigzag. It causes him stress, Mr. Pendanski said. I know you mean well, Stanley, but face it. Zero's too stupid to learn to read. That's what makes his blood boil, not the hot sun. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Mr. Pendanski handed him the shovel. Here, take it, Zero. It's all you'll ever be good for. Zero took the shovel. Then he swung it like a baseball bat. The metal blade smashed across Mr. Pendanski's face. His knees crumpled beneath him. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. The counselors all drew their guns. Zero held the shovel out in front of him as if he were going to try to bat away the bullets. "I hate digging holes," he said. Then he slowly backed away. "Don't shoot him," said the warden. "He can't go anywhere. The last thing we need is an investigation." Zero kept backing up, out past the cluster of holes the boys had been digging, then farther and farther out onto the lake. "He's going to have to come back for water," the warden said. Stanley noticed Zero's canteen lying on the ground near his holes. A couple of the counselors helped Mr. Pendanski to his feet and into the truck. Stanley looked out towards Zero, but he had disappeared into the haze. The warden ordered the counselors to take turns guarding the shower room and rec room, all day and all night. They were not to let Zero drink any water. When he returned, he was to be brought directly to her. She examined her fingernails and said, "It's almost time for me to paint my nails again." Before she left, she took the 6 remaining members of Group D that she still expected 7 holes. And that was our episode of Read Along, Read Aloud with our book Holes by Sachar. And I'll see you guys next time.